Great to see you all. See people from very far away and very close. Welcome to tonight's reading with Will Alexander. I'm Johannes Göransson from the Notre Dame Creative Writing Program. Today we have the great fortune of welcoming the great original of American poetry, Will Alexander, who's going to read from his new eco-visionary tome, The Combustion Cycle, as well as some other poems. About Alexander, another great California poet, Harriet Mullen, has written that his poetry is, quote, global, even cosmic in scope, encyclopedic in its display of esoteric knowledge and arcane vocabularies, visionary in its apocalyptic intensity. Others have compared him to figures like Aimé Césaire and Antonin Artaud. Alexander began publishing with Clayton Eshelman's magazine Sulphur and Nathaniel Mackey's magazine Hambone in the 80s. Since then, he has published a number of books, including works of drama and criticism, but most importantly, poetry, including the Sri Lankan Loxodrome, Asia and Haiti, the Stratospheric Canticles. Though genre is not important, it's not as important to Alexander as it might be to other authors. It seems like he moves across genres and all kinds of boundaries with great intensity. His frequent use of words like combustion, ignition, contortion, and germination, signaling an aesthetics of volatility and transformation. These transformations also take place on the level of language itself. In an interview with Mullen, Alexander explains his process. Quote, I find words every day that I've never seen used before. I might use words that I create, words that didn't exist in the language. He adds, it's not that I know these other languages like Spanish or Italian, but I can feel their rhythm, although I'm writing in English. Writing a foreign language within your own language creates another language. In almost every stanza of the combustion cycle, Alexander gathers, bends, contorts, deforms, and combusts a plethora of languages, fusing languages of science with the language of the occult or the mystical and the surreal to create another kind of English, entrancing, mind-altering, and transformational. Prepare to have a lot of language coming your way. My advice is not to try to make sense of it, but to stay in the moment. And we'll have a Q&A at the end, and then you can ask questions if you feel perplexed. Now, I'm pleased to welcome Will Alexander.
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you all for appearing this evening. I will start reading from a text that was printed some years ago at New Directions, the Sri Lankan Loxodrome, and I'll start with some of the smaller texts. And the first one is A Nexus of Phantoms. In a lorikeet cave, motions exist of disintegrated swans in a translocated lake brimming with harvested poisons, sealed by corruptive postmortems. Such swans, staggered by microbial reasoning, their aggressive nest anatomical with anomaly, with drifts of strenuous incarnadine leanings, with a thirst which hurdles conspiratorial invasives, alive with coronal oceanics, open like a clouded trail of rendings. Analogous with the auks, the pelicans, the mergansers, perhaps with the petrels and the gannets, under the power of darted mocking orations. The swans looking back on solemn blood perusal, like a form of death breaking roses on a shore. It is the example of phonograms, of lost and compacted lenses turning within a charismatic fall line, or an isonaph, or what an avian would announce in Greenland as a catabolic wind. The swans, like a haze of magnetism or implied gondola locations, where the scent of each lorikeet is consumed and brought to dazzling eclipse refulgence. In another foci, in another depth, their form self-challenged, in a cloak of suns, their power de-revealed with 7 moons burning, reduced to 2 intense incendiary magnets. And these incendiary magnets, like a nexus of phantoms, scattered across a geometric optometry. I'll switch to another book with a smaller poem here. It's from the volume Compression and Purity, published around the same era, about 2011, 12. But this is entitled "The Deluge in Formation." If one believes oneself a stasis, there exists no seepage, no neural density or scar. One then saturates as ash, as pointless cannibal's lethargy, as dislodged ink from a podium or a treatise. One comes to know demobility as a craft, as an arc which solders itself to specifics. Yet to know one's non-sequester through mundane advancement as doorway or basic habit as speculation. I am speaking of chastisement or cross-referential superimposition. Within this condition, I am more like a crow from crucial underwater fires, a crucial underwater crow. Neither Chinese nor Shinto, but the black dimensionality is hidden underwater mass, which persists by daring, which seems at the surface a purposeless kinetic or a pointless mandrel's infection. Saying such, I consider myself a reddish Shinto crow, then just as strongly a black anathema crow, then just as quickly a sun-fed crow from snow-washed volcanoes. So I look to myself as winter, as inclement carrion monger, as flight through great electrical haze. I being blur who shapes the Empyrean, who invokes withdrawal, who instills in its forces stunning psychic transference. For me, the language propels itself, but it also magnetizes itself to the unknown continuously. So I have this idea, not the idea, but this impact of hearing voices simultaneously all the time. And one word can lead to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or any number of combinations. So it's completely circular, nonlinear. So with that said, I'll try another one. I'll call these poems kind of like apparitions. And we'll try this one here. It's called Water as a Dysphoric Medium. A skittish form in sudden arsenic waters, amplified like a smoky siphonophore within a black gestation of strata. The water then burns beneath an androgynous source of lilies, with each of its moons exploded like garish millipedes in resin. Thought becomes an isotope within hydrology, within an inorganic compound, within the power of its youngest sea, where I imagine in its depths the force of stunning manganese trees or a body of crows trapped within a heated polar ceiling. The depths reverse with their isobars, with their dust counts, like land condemned to brutish weak projection. The biopsies, the oxygen meters, the taste of stunned plankton, like a concentrated polyp from a tribe of spontaneous stellar refinement. The anatomical, the blank globigerina of debris, like darting alchemical thievery or dazed selenium hull, or vaporized boreum, falling miles and miles to the bottom, flecked at a level beyond carbonized petroleum, beyond that which antedates salt. I'm speaking of energies which ingest the first perfected forms of creation, the primordium of waves, the calligraphy of torment. And so the coelacanths, the vampire fish, the orbits of volcanoes endure. And the timing of the amplitudes, the surges, the gust, like thermal craters which explode and collapse and reabsorb themselves as a fulminant microalgae, as a violent insomnial structure devoid of blood, of instance, of birth, the writhing dunes, the dark conduction of saliva, de-energized by merging, then brought to bear upon fruit of unfertilized deltas. Each poem is a containment of all these energies, and they can be, is like the combustion cycle goes over 600 pages, but then I'm gonna take a look at some of the other works that are 1 or 2 lines, few lines. And I put as much energy and as much concentration in the smaller works as I do the larger works. That's for sure. And it's all about purity. It's not about compression and purity, but not about how many pages you have, how much. It's about the quality of language, not the quantity of language. And I know a lot of poets, and they start out, they are thinking about a lot of pages, but it's what's on the page. It could be 1 or 2 words and be very effective. So we want to concentrate on the quality of consciousness that the writer embodies in his or her work. And this is one I didn't expect to read, but it's called Coping Prana. It is the way I breathe through chronic terrifying ferns, through a black ungracious stoma. It is this uranium rejoinder, this impact pointing backwards. And when witness causes observers to panic, to blur and forget and to flee. They can't see my approach, my wayward dorsal looming, my lettering in black drizzle. It is my approach, my weaving, my sigillus curved embankment. Therefore, I can never name myself or plot myself according to the sparks or the splinters from the workbench. Dazed with ruthless salivation, with my awkward insular roamings, I am like a few darkened eaglets riveted against the moon. Then I'm brought to a table by deafness, feasting with herons, which spins me by embranglement, by incircular abatement, always seeking to have me nuded beneath my derma so as to talk to myself, so as to cancel my structureless scrutiny. They speak of me as lawless, as despicable, as a typhoon in Seawell. As tomorrows, as the fixed and accelerated combination, they fix me as deserted, bereft, as a fragment from a starving lion's compendium. I'm considered as a pointless positron without image, as hieroglyph, as sundial, as martyr, being leakage from a barbarous index province. And as I just said, the smaller works are always valuable, and because I'm always writing from consciousness, not from as an author. You know, authors think about how they're going to structure a book. I just start and let the works take over. And I don't mean that in a superficial manner, but in the way that the works speak to me and dictate themselves, because they do dictate themselves. Language, when it really works, is dictated to you, rather than you dictating to it, because you're coming from a more limited psychocultural expression that tends to delimit. But if something comes to you, it's harder to put it in a smaller container. And so therefore it gives you a sense of freedom, not only when you write it, but when it's read, and it has the chances of lasting for long, long periods of time. And so this is a poem entitled From Compression and Purity, called Beginning After Existence. On the threshing floor, there are spiders which astonish, with replications which irradiate, which strike resistance, which terrify, which defoil carnivorous amoebas, with each fiber, with each mandible, with each blood knot gone astray, flailing, embryonic, shifting, out of red or exerted magma, threading their weight throughout a melanotic angle into ghostly osmosis. And this next piece is called A Zodiacal Instinct. To coordinate tigers, to look into the bright domain of sullen deactivity, is to walk on threads, is to hallucinate navamshas. Amidst the liminal, in the crucial foundation, in the cranial foundation, there are colors which erupt into a blankness which reconnoiters, which re-erupts into ratio, into earthquake curricula, in which a form of flame spirals, frayed at its core by potentia. And on another plane, it's called Absorbing a tumbled foci, absorbing verdurous angularities with blackened electron resistance, with a coiled and perfidious complication, like a fowl in a blazeless solar ocean, scattering its sound across noiseless sodium rejoinders. You know, poetry is one of the last magic elements that we have in the seemingly so-called civilized compendium of life. And it is still revolutionary because not because it's talking about just a social impact, but a circular impact, the way that stars revolve or ocean waves break. It's a natural element that's been going on far, far beyond the university structure or the schools or the acts of writing in terms of what how can I say, what the psychology seems to call for at that moment, because it continues to transcend itself all the time. In that sense, it's revolutionary because it's turning. Stars turn, people turn. It's a natural element of living, that if you go to another planet, same thing is going to happen, maybe in different forms, but in different psychologies. In fact, another psychology in Sri Lanka, or a situation with exoplanets. I just read that there's been an exoplanet discovered that's average temperature is, I think, minus 300 degrees. And there's another planet recently witnessed that has average temperature over 4,000 degrees. So indeed, we're not dealing with just a simple situation in this universe. This is almost, I want to say, chance, but it is very fortuitous situation for us as humans, as we live 93 million miles from the sun, with they call it the Goldilocks zone. And how many planets in the Goldilocks zone that are just positioned just right would have this type of intelligence blooming? According to what I know of Sri Aurobindo, the great yogin, he says this may be the only planet with this type of intelligence, this type of active intelligence. If you look so far at the exoplanet dossier, he's very, very on point so far. But we're dealing with continuous discovery. We don't know what we're going to find. In fact, Avi Loeb talked about, the astronomer from Harvard talked about the asteroid coming in as an extraterrestrial mothership. But that's up for grabs. We don't know that for sure. It's not a certainty, but we're not kind of wanting to exclude anything. This is like in poetry, you hear things all the time. I hear things all the time personally, but I understand that they sometimes come out of order, but at a certain point, I'm able to pull them into a structure. Like, I think Herbie Hancock once said that he had some notes that were off, and Miles Davis was able to bend them and bring them into the flow. And so this is what I'm concerned for all the time, is bringing that into the mantra, bringing energy into the mantra of I call it the sub-humming of poetry. And so that can include any strata of information. And it can be internal, external. It can deal with geology, or it can be with exoplanets, or it can deal with oceanography. All these things are available to the poet. And so why stay into a 4-block radius, which is psychology, wizened by, compromised events. So in other words, the language doesn't have a chance to really grow and extend itself. And I'm interested in extending language, not to deprive it or myself. And as you open language, you open to the language, and you approach things in yourself that were not previously known to yourself, even a minute or two prior. And this is how I get to certain works. I'm going to read a poem from many years ago from my volume, I can't think of, Above the Human Nerve Domain, that Harriet so graciously wrote on, blurbed the book for me. It's just called The Iridescent Enigma. It's a little longer. It's a voice of a hummingbird speaking, which was a precursor to, in a certain way, to the book that of the combustion cycle, where I have a whole, my first meditation is 350 page, whatever it is, 300-page poem on the voice of a hummingbird. So this was my first proto exclamation of the hummingbird's consciousness, and it's called the Iridescent Enigma. In this smokeless Harrier desolation, I have surmounted inscrutable errata under two electric polar moons, shifting between the colors of slate blue and magenta. I, the Andean hill star, hovering in these Martian X-ray waste, the iridescent enigma, my centripetal wings beating against the soul of cartographical surcease, with its innervated distension, with its migrating sun loss. The triple atmosphere corroded by tense elliptical static, by the drainage from barbarous glacial nerves, so that the strange contentions of Phobos make the human staggering genetic less and less a factor where ciphers are beheaded. Humankind now tending to gaze from a portfolio of grand green, from a model as nervous collective. So I'm alone, having absorbed isolation, having absorbed the general coloration of imbalance, isolated by planet, from Augustus Lumicellus, from Lafornus Magnifica, in an alien enigma, alone. I have left the earth and its species incapable of self-rescue, of the dazzling vapor which transmutes, which allows the watery chemicals to rise and take on the wisdom of vertical misnomer, of the acid which blends with the aerial oxide waters, with the prepotent force of natural helium speech, which implodes, which transcends present character, constricted as it is by anorexia and debris. Its retention corrosively split into an oblong grain which ceases, like a bleak Siberian witch in tragic forms of respiration. Its sodium, kindled by fractions which torment, which hounds the aspiration as to apogee, as to consuming volation. So I, as hummingbird, as expanded broach points in the blood, seeking elongation and task, which conflagrates inertia. Again, the task, so that luminance snake through the cells, no longer palpable as visual largesse, as silken sanguinary spectrums, to be bled and negatively fed to half-learned upheavals. I, who now live above the liminal burst which exists between that which flees and that which stays sullied. No, I am not marooned on an ophthalmic plateau, cartographically contained, as though Peru were the only distance, the only mercurial diamond to be breathed, to be absorbed as exclusive monomial clarity. So the barrenness, the solemn gamma ray gradations, the probing snows on electric mines, Olympus mines, with its scattered rays, with its geometric diamonds, congealed in the orbit of black and Sphinxian diameter, which gives me claim to magical fluxation and mist, so that my 5 former bodies example gives to my aura a fabled discipline and a marker, and a glance which traces odor according to hieroglyphic substance capable of plenitudes and aggressions capable of neurological disaffirmatives. Here I am, woven by gravitational nobility, yet a free and cold space, known throughout the yellowed Saturnian inveiglements, or across the Uranian methane formations, or in the Oort configuration, where a basic elevation is open, where pre-turpentine milling of the living and the living dead are both broadened and destroyed. So that the atmosphere and earthly debility of garrison becomes a canceled habitat for being. Yes, for a dense and offensive procurement, so that the Holocaust of tribes, the central extermination of salt, is no longer that which will flower in a post-racial Kemet, being the aboriginal darkness which pre-exists time. Again, the invisible fever which opens in the being a random helium morale, a picture of Negrito, of a cinder inside a cinder, which post exists the inverse, called by gross existence a predirectional Eden. So one can never explain the pure charisma of my zodiac, the instant bell of my zodiac, under the Christian law of simple post-mortem carnage. Never a blame cast by twists and thickets of the invaded, and then annulled by solar crystallization, known to varied shifts and different antinomies of creation. Here I am, graspless, a comedic eclipse incarnation, which overcomes the vial by he who migrates from nectar, who unmingles barley, by he who detracts weight. Poetry predicts itself, and that particular poem predicted the large piece that just appeared in print. It's magnetic and magical, and it can flare out from different angles simultaneously. Not just one project, but you maybe hear projects and sub-projects and sub-projects. I tell you, one of the things that brought me to different genres was the fact that I was writing text and I started to hear other forms of text, particularly drama. I never considered myself to be able to write plays, never. It felt too complicated and cumbersome. But one evening I was reading, and as I read, a voice did come to me. I don't know where it came from. I really don't. It's a mystery. And it's like Andre Breton talks about he called it the jumping bean. He says you shouldn't open the bean, just let it jump. So I didn't try to analyze anything that I was hearing, and I began to write, and it turned into my first play. And that's work, generating work, because I had no idea consciously that I would get to that level. And it's exfoliated and expanded to such a degree that I've been able to write about, I'd say a dozen plays right now. We're trying to look at some of those as parts of production, but not seriously, because it's just so much work, and I'm doing so much work now. It's a little bit in the distance, but they've been written. So in other words, work comes from a seed and it grows, just like trees grow. People grow too, but in a culture like we are involved in today, we're static. We're static in terms of, we've been put into the static compound where we supposedly don't grow, we don't do anything, but we just become children, and then we grow, and then we disappear. But so much you can do with living that people are not using their potential. So for the writer, it creates a wavelength of intuition and intuitional power that allows growth to take place outside of the local and psychology, like the John Synge's Playboy of the Rustin World. Some energy comes in and it explodes the character of the minimums, and you begin to grow and take a chance on your energy. And so that's what poetry does. It takes a chance on your energy, and it's not about being correct or incorrect. I learned this from the great 23-year-old great Booker Little, the great trumpeter who passed away prematurely. He says when you at a certain level of wavelength, you don't deal with mistakes, you deal with process. So that's where I'm at with process. And we don't want to go too long here, but I wanted to read part of a poem from Exobiology as Goddess, which is, I think, written in mid-2000s, 2005 or 6. And there's a quote from Northrop Frye here. He says, "The poet, like the pure mathematician, depends not on descriptive truth, but on conformity to his hypothetical postulates. Her range, a catabolic ash, dispersed across my strange nomadic hearing, alive as bleak metabolizing voids. And she is alive inside this darkness with her pure acidulous powers as audic speculation, as a conclave of serpents, as double migratory winds, at one point persistent solely to Asia. She is mirage whose aura is wattage, a blue-white glow, a homoseismal lines welling up from her sides like earthquake patterns or cunning salvatara, creating from my perusal a flight of inverted demons, then summoning from her sound a compound of ammonia and gravity, palpable as burning electrical transition. Her ciphers condensed as a compound and transit species. As goddess, she floats through sudden methane harbors, angling dust from seas on the moon, revealing herself as Huerta, as pomegranate, as an iceberg calved from glaciers on Uranus. On nights when the sun whispers, she emits her form through reflection, as though from odor from hypabyssal rocks, her sounds now sunken to the seabed with all its auroral fires. The impact of her voice more disturbing than a grammar of blizzards or rigid portion of broken tabular mass. The solar concavity then hovering in a voiceless anti-rain as pointless electrical fuel, its totalic green mist, suddenly synonymous with Solia, with her broken dromedary plantings, with her treasonous infertility, her voice rafted with perplexities, with ironics hidden in a floating neural vacuum, in intergalactic hissing warrens. So to announce her full effect is far beyond treacherous monotony or snow. She remains the dark, unstable onus, the black treaty as balance, flying apart and burning, being mirage as congelation, as formless tributary pony, algid, biting, ingenerate, aroused in one zone as an elemental leopard, in another as reversal of simums in amber, alive as percussive obsidian shale, as fluid which dwells at the barrier of ether. I call her the Chaldean seamstress, forging hominids from darkness. And from Arabian blue deserts, she emits her tonality through deafness, as perfect fruit acquired through agenda, so that matter does not transpire as her optic sub rosa. Therefore, she generates topography as combative meridians through storks of drift, through isometric deeds. The poem goes on and on, but I'll stop there for the sake of the reading here. But I'll travel here to another zone of consciousness. And this is a poem that I scripted, and I'll read only a portion of that too. This was a poem that was interesting for me because it was conducted in my consciousness around 2000, I think 2006. It was printed in 2011. But around 2006, I was living near Caltech, and not too terribly far from Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I got this idea about water on Mars. And it was such a strain to do it, to imagine how water would be on Mars. I could feel the water on Mars. This is you're talking about billions of years ago. So this is how my mind was working, and I was able to get it out, the poem out of great strain and persistence. But I later discovered that the search for water on Mars was going on at that very time, and I was not that far away from that search at JPL. So this is called Water on New Mars. In fact, we recorded this previously at the BIM House in Amsterdam with the great orchestra with one of the great musicians, Gaston Badamantu, that I was part. I'm the poet in the band. It's called the name of the group. I'll think of it in 1 second, but it was a great collective. We had about 25 pieces, and this was part of the poem, was part of the performance, was Water on New Mars. And I'll just read a portion of this poem. Being water, I am the voltage of rocks, of algid suns in transition, flying across the scape of bitter Martian dioxide, moving boulders by abandoned fossil premonition, the poles quaking, sun misjudged through my aperture of prisms, my oceans pre-existent and trembling as a soil inside iridium constellations, like invisible glacial misnomers, like dark magnetic rivers, strange and totemic with current, where proto-jaguars advance, where lichen de-exist, where the cells blaze at the cusp of hovering Fahrenheit. Having evolved from space, my perfect first falling, like an indigo amniotic, burrowing like a blank encrypted gravitas, as wandering anemia, as floating protoquana, obscuring my own deafness, where the winds howl, where the soil maladjusts to my thinking. It is 100 billion years before my coming. I use no exterior crafting so as to withstand me, no nautical monology to sculpt my various geometries, to claim and disclaim my pointless hydrogen sumas. I remain the greenish sonar heron, the combustible yeast, the exhausted locust hull, pre-enzymic with the force of hydrated complication, itinerant with visitation, my voice seeming to spin from the great Quetzal palace in space, like diamonds falling from a fabulum of ciphers, like a river of moons flowing over slate. I, who exact my powers, a blizzard of orbits. I, who know from my powers a portion 90 times 9, a billion times over. Of course, this is graced by sumptuous hesitation, by delimited decimals as impetition of ferocious powers implied by displacement, by seething hydrogen as osmosis. I fall by terrible quickening in darkness, creating an unstable balance as weather, as dissonant inner functioning as power. At 3/4 cycle, I regress to implosion so as to ignite each shift through ascensional quandary, so that levels shift and return through exponential drift, through meteoritic harvest, seeming to probe by insatiable regression, by limitless rudiment, by stunning pluvial osmosis, water as sigil, as carnivorous land fields gone blind. This is New Mars, its mountain heights blackened like double seeing of Olympus Mons, with its sinister scars, with its deflected rays from Phobos. New Mars, a smaller, a faultless deafness, alive through ghostly silhouette, through kinetic margin as dissension. I exist as rigor, not quite riddle, not quite seismic, being gnomic, being neural innuendo, as polar argon as ascendant, all of the above, a phantom botany, empowered by curious technical width. I'll stop at that point because we don't want to, the poem will go on very long. It'll just consume the rest of the reading. But we're trying to get energy into every line, every word, every phoneme, because that is not from the outside in, but from the inside out, where the consciousness of the language is soaked with consciousness, not from just the way the trees grow. You know, the energy comes from the seed, comes from a small portion, and then turns into a mighty oak. And if we look at everything from the outside, like a postcard or something like that, you won't feel the power. You won't feel the energy surging, the language surging through you. So you're more tempted by, what can I say, a ascendant that comes out of the academy, or it comes out of the entertainment field. It's not a real energy that's surging through you. And there are exceptions, and just looking at Billie Holiday or people on that level where the work comes out of them, it's not perfected on the outside. Garcia Lorca talked about this, the energy coming, the poetry coming from him. And you feel that kind of energy sometimes in Dylan Thomas as well. But it's that kind of raw energy that we're talking about here, not sculpted school or an intellectual process where I want to sound radical, but the work itself comes out natural. It's like Eric Dolphy and John Coltrane once did an interview about their music growing like weeds from the pavement, I should say. The life is so strong it can merge out of concrete. So that's the way I've looked at poetry my whole time through, is like having emerged from difficult circumstances. As Gurdjieff once said, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff says that the thicker the fog, the better the engine runs. So that's been my life, the thick fog, but a lot of energy coming out of that thick fog. And difficult sometimes, and poetry has to merge with you have to develop character as you move through life. And difficult circumstances, micro circumstances that seem to be just challenge you at every step of the way, every turn of the language. But one thing that difficulties bring, it's like a relief when you write poetry. Like Michel Lely says, the gift of lines is like to paraphrase Larice, it's a gift from the gods. So you can begin to live with this internal lightness and this internal prosperity that is non-monetary. So enough talking. I'll do another piece from the large book that just came out. I'll give you a look-see at the book itself. Maybe some of the audience members, one or two maybe have it. It's just came out, the combustion cycle. And it's an interesting publisher here with, Roof Books took a good chance and got this book out. I never thought I would get this book out, really, because of the size and the density of it. But Mr. Sherry was really, really magnanimous, and we were able to get through in a fairly quick amount of time. So what I'll do is I'm going to read a portion of this poem here, the first poem, which is about concerning the Hindbane Bird. Hindbane Bird is really based on the poem I read earlier about the Andean hill star. And the Andean hill star, to be more precise, is the second largest hummingbird on Earth. Not the first, but the second largest. And that was so interesting to me, so magnetic. Not just there's another poem in Chile it's a little larger. But I saw an Indian hill star fly once on a nature program. It just stayed in my mind, and it just continued to fascinate me on. And it continues. Hummingbirds continue to fascinate me because they're just like magical birds. To me, they're just fantastic omens in a good manner. So I'll read a few pages from this, and we'll maybe, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I don't want to go any too much longer. But this is a portion of the Hindbane Bird, from Concerning the Hindbane Bird. He says, "This is why I've returned from the dead, as the great poltergeist who wonders, who darts through salted manganese ruins, giving document to the inclement. This is why I land on spotted neutron logs, on defective bullets in grass, to test the arcane leaning of the world, its projection, its exhibit beyond disrupted stomas. So through spillage, through countless myriamas, I have come to sorcerer's foretelling, through the eyes of a sickened fetus, through the heat that rises from tainted Mustang skin. I witness aloof collusional embryonics where all birth is stained, all naturally corrupted on the visible plane, within its coagitated penumbra, evolved through anatomical struggle, through sidereal development, through an unseasoned forte, neutered, which eclipses itself through cause and counter cause, through movement, which endures, through infelicitous movement, less and less as it focuses its breath on the molecules of sapiens sapiens. And this is not to say that sapiens sapiens have no right, have no display as to variety or significance. No, I do not degrade human utterance as sudden neural lessening. Yet my present shape of voice is magically tangled with single Holocaust threading, with nullification being vatic. As its molecules transmute, I am the bird from magical undervapor, moving as Jeopardist flask, teleporting my rays to Swedish lakes, to algal congestion in Venice lagoons, partaking of crucial ozone scintilla, so as to desperately resurge as ozone across operant duration, 3 billion years in the making. Now that I am suspicious of new waking, but I know my power of impact, its garrulous outer task, in a kingdom now sweltering with deformity. My voice, not simply a gloomy didactic, spawning in dark medicinal poisons, but a proto-supernal complexity, analogous in human endeavor to Moorish Cordoba, with its intensive madrasas, its botany, its medicine, its velocity of percipience. I can be called a mysterious indigo sigil, focused as primeval number upon dark tarantula grasses, unleashing a curious metropolis of galaxies. There exist Elanam, Mirfak, Alhena, splayed across the heavens as pure vibrational ciphers, as Andalusian sigils, as crucibles of transparency. There's the binary Hadar, condensed in Iberia, that projects etheric drift, allowing being to vary its dimensional forms. I, as bird of numerous dimensional shifts, telepathically whirring as power through alchemical abstentia, being an infiltration of specters, simultaneous across differing forms voracious in Sri Lanka, mangrove swamps of dispersing hells in various depths of the Nightong River, disrupting carbonized waste from the Rio de la Plata, perhaps while fluttering across ravines of hell. Motions from Andromeda will call me as an ancient miraculous raptor, dialectically chronicled as blazeless wavering on earth, juggling death as amorphic delay, my wings encoded with prayer, amidst the battle kaleidoscopic with gravity, then suddenly re-existing in the Hercules cluster, aligning my light with the beyond, the Magellanic clouds with Tucana, with the pinwheel galaxy focused in triangulum. Excuse that reading, but it's my first time looking at it. This is what I do with writing and reading. I'm so concentrated on writing that sometimes I'll get a book printed, I won't really look at it very much. And I'm doing them at such a rate, not superficially, but the mind is continuing to travel and move and to condense and exfoliate all kinds of energies all at once. And it's like Miro once said that his studio was littered with creative objects, paintings, drawings, but they were all in different stages of development. So for me, each book is always involved in levels of development. And one thing can be finished, another thing can be going on at another stage, and still another going on at another stage, and something else is going on at that rate. So it allows you to move like what we call in jazz music is circular breathing, something that Sonny Rollins talks about, circular breathing. Not everybody can do it, but in other words, be able to carry on your mind as a circular movement, and this is what allows me to develop and work and move at a rate that's at a certain, I'm not working linearly in that way. It's not one stop, two stops, three stops, four stops. By the way, there's a great book that's been very helpful for me over the years. It's trying to think of the name of the book. Lateral Thinking by Edward de Bono. It's an exercise book on thought and how you can get out of the linear entrapment of one thing after another thing after another thing. And because we're so entangled with our minds, one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and we're always graded on the way we think. We're used to that from our basic educational processes when we're 5 or 6 years old. And the mind gets trapped into that little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, beginning, middle, end. But the cosmos does not work like that. And so what you find in poetry is the mind is free to move in a circular motion. And you can pick up this and you can pick up that. And it's not a superficial situation, but it's a continuous activity where one energy feeds another energy all the time. And poetry is you can't be graded on poetry. That's what I love about it. It's creation. And so how can you grade the cosmos? You can grade this planet as to life, whether there's life there. Of course there's life there. It's just, as I said, there's a planet with 4,000 degrees. That's a form of life. Maybe that's not a life that you would find in central London. You would find this life throughout the cosmos. And too much we've tried to disintegrate energy into a small packet of a small packed mindset that doesn't allow real expansion. In fact, this is what you notice in the sciences or in the security agencies. They have this whole idea of anomalous cognition, where they try to take the beyond and try to stuff it into a small jar of daily consciousness. It doesn't work. That's what's hard to jam consciousness into poetic consciousness into daily thought and have it really grow and give you the kind of electricity that allows the poet to expand into his or her own work. You have to expand into your own work, not into someone else's. And that's the originality of it. You can learn other people's work, but to expand into someone else's ideas won't be quite as energetic and fruitful and alchemical. I call it alchemical. It's an alchemical movement. So you're always traversing the unknown. And I'm at a certain stage now where my life is merging with further extensions of the invisible, because, having been on this planet for a certain degree of time, you should start to really grow. You should really grow with your language rather than stay into a nice pattern where people recognize who you are and you stay in that pattern. It's an impossibility for a creative artist when he has a patron that wants to keep him solidified in a prior momentum. And so we want to go beyond beyond the prior into the greater momentum, which is, by the way, unknown and is not it's not calculable, it's not calculable by the past. Excuse me if I'm going a little fast here, but I discovered a kind of mindset. I have a new book, by the way, coming out next couple of months from now. Excuse my fax machine here. I have a new book coming out from Africa World Press. It's called On Dar El Hikmah. And we're going to, and I discovered through doing this research that these early Islamic scholars had grown out of the basic seed that was basically African or Egyptian at Luxor, where they would educate the mind as a circular movement. And you were not graded, but you were given levels, you rose to levels of consciousness through study of geography or medicine or whatever topic that you were embroiled with. It was about the universe. These are all portions of the universe, and botany, poetry. All these things are not separated linearly, where you can't do this, you can't do this, but you can do this and do that. In other words, mind was not divided, but was a continuous movement. And so that's the way my mind works, is a continuous circularity, and all subjects are opened for discussion, and not discussion, but creation, that I can grow from these fragments and put them into a whole. And they act as germinations or seeds. And this is the way that the mind once worked on this earth. And if the mind were able to go back to that, I call it an indigenous circularity, we might have a better condition than we have at the present time, because we do these starts and stops. And one thing about poetry, it doesn't just stop and start, but it continues to flow and continue to exfoliate and grow, just like a forest grows. And I will probably end with one other piece of work. And I'll go back to the Loxodrome poem, and I'll read a portion of a poem that was done called the Bedouin Art. And I'll read a couple pages of that, because this is circularity. So I'm not using a linear model, and I'm not skipping around, but we're just getting into the flow here of work. And the Bedouin Art says, repetition is de-existence, is condoned and respun vapor, which continues to post-exist as mirages across an arc, as lucid underwater scent. An arc with its compression of oars, with its one simultaneous ascent over and above the simultaneous as movement. Its obliterated form where the body of the captain reappears and disappears, eruptive with schisms and salts, eruptive with copias, blanquillos, and starfish, extrinsic and solstitial to any forewarned destination, to any leprosy or rupture or fragment. An arc at the same time betrayed and withdrawn through an index of phantoms, like a squall beneath a stunning alabaster tide, invigorated by pre-existing persons within its hull, spawned by a runic sea moon calendric, by fields of gnarled lava, predaceous orange-brown spider crabs feeding in diametrical coldness. The arc, now again invisible to itself, amidst volcanic flamelets, fanning anonymous blades of crushing underwater jade. The wind around its hull with a void of pusillanimous optometry, a shell of scorched bottoms, a mechanics exponentially concussive, like a solitary benzene or an earthquake phylum or riddled scorpion typhoon. Because this arc, captained by scaleless ghosts, scripting their foundations from methane, from a stinging pottery of nerves, like murmurs from a hatchet well, scribbling maps, inducing subtractive protein on chemosynthetic shockwaves of vertigo. So in the depths of bioluminescence, a void, a glassy conduit of ore, a propulsive cilia, a whip-like chimera, the captain scripting these events in the geometric log concerning the brackish flare from his central burning body, a body below creatrix waters, a body below the circulation of the trilobites. So that there constantly exists a smokeless anti-existence which seemingly enshrouds a multiple quantity or a glare, much in the form of a stognucleic food stock, like a summed explosive strife, which is the terra incognita, the fearful archaeology of fate. The arc, failing to illumine its former maritime amniotic by means of any purposeful or magic diorthosis, or any of the perplexing tonics of salinity, or by the Gorgonian as former body by persona, be it the pelvic whale or the caudal dolphin, the body of the captain, a blank indeterminate ether, a smoldering solstice phantom, a soma beyond the depth of his former viewing range. I'll end right there. I don't want to propel this too very long because poetry requires a certain kind of a concentration. We don't want to juggle the brain pan too much, but I think we'll end from now on the reading.
Thank you, Will.
Okay.
Several people have already asked questions in the comment section. I will ask them to you, and maybe if other people have questions, you can raise your hands and we can call on you. The first question was by Maria Damon, who says, "You have great faith in language. Is there anything language can't do or any place it can't go?"
It's unlimited. It's unlimited. Well, I think it's limited by the fact that there's cultural constraints on what it's supposed to do. In terms of its magic, it's beyond any kind of constraint. That's what the freedom is about. You know, it's absolute liberty. It allows one to really live.
Joe Safdie asked, "I see the organic systems, the eternal crashing and turning and metamorphosis of minerals and vegetables, and even a few animals, but why psychology? Where is the psyche? Or is it a different kind of mind? One more capacious and encompassing?"
It's probably closer to the latter, where we don't even know what the mind can do. We're just at the surface waters. And this language is actually, I'd say, like a kind of yoga that allows one to develop in certain ways that are outside of any category.
All right, great. Aristide Kirby asks, "Can you? What is your favorite Egyptian god?"
That's a good question. The crocodile gods, the sun gods, all of them, you know, because of the fact that they represent the netters, you know, the gods, the psychologies of the gods make up the combination of humanity. And it's not separating one god out from another, but to combine all the elements into to what I'd call like a river of worship.
Sandra Simons says, "I'm curious as to how Will sees the progression of his poetry over the decades. How has it changed and what has he learned?"
Well, I learned a lot about what I don't know, but you know, in other words, it's intimate and you grow with yourself. You begin to grow with the language and you begin to evolve as a being. You know, so I think what poetry is about, it's like an exercise, a kind of a way into reality. It's not just about books, but it's the exercise of what it is to experience language and move it in certain wavelengths of mystery.
All right, PJ Lombardo asks, "You said the force you're attuned to, quote, breaks through concrete. How do we harness this force? When did poetry first break through concrete for you?"
All from the beginning. I was always after this, always from my first book, which was Vertical Rainbow Climber, and it's like a mantra, and it wakes me up every day, and it propels me in daily life. I'm always like an other. I'm never involved in the quotidian moment as such, and I've been able to survive, but I don't know how. But you know, being on this outside, you know, looking at another energy of awareness.
Okay, so Misael Osario Conde has a couple of questions. One is that considering the significant spiritual element in your work, can you talk about practical exercises such as meditation and prayer, and if they have had any effect on your writing? And he also asks, in reference to what my quote from the introduction, what role translation has played for your writing?
Well, writing has been a natural element for me that it's kind of like prayer, you know, in that sense. And it's not a religious activity, though. It's an energy activity. It's an energetic activity. It has nothing to do with this or that, but it evolves out of one's leaning as a writer, as a creative person, I should say. And it's and the second question, say that once again.
What's the role of what is the role has translation?
Oh yeah, that's done a lot for me. You know, Octavio Paz, Julio Cortázar, and you know, I have this idea about translating within your own language. I'm talking about translating not just language, but a mind state, a mental state. They said that language surrealism is French, but it really isn't. It's consciousness. It can operate in all levels, in English language, all different languages around the world. It's just a level of consciousness that one reaches in one's practice, of language.
What do you think is the difference between consciousness and psychology, to go back to the first question or the second question there?
Consciousness is an understanding not of systems, but of reality. And it's like working with yourself is a particle of this mystery we all find ourselves in. And I'm not saying that in a certain kind of namby-pamby way, but in a way that we are part of something that we just wake up into. It's amazing. It's amazing. And we still don't know all the theories and all the information that's accruing about the heavens. It's still, they don't even know what the shape of the universe, they're trying to talk about the shape of the universe at present, but what do we know about this? What do we know about, I saw this figure about the other day that had 167 and 30 zeros behind it. I don't even know what that number is. Maybe someone in the audience knows that number, but I don't know that number. It breaks the mind open. And that's the level that I'm working with, you know, where knowledge is ancillary to that activity, that field of vision. Right. But you don't go, you just don't go from the fragment to the whole, but you go from the whole to that infuses and uplifts the fragment.
All right, Jeff Broswell. Yep.
Yes, Will, this is Jeff Braswell. I wanted to thank you very much for the reading today and put a good word out that we really appreciated the recording that you did of Solea with Gassim Batamutu's project, A Gift from Train, back with the New Nova Compound. Mm-hmm. And it's a pleasure to hear you and see you again, my friend.
Very good. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Does anybody have questions you want in the rest of you? Can raise your hand or write it out. Yeah, Mary?
I had formulated something much longer, but in your reading, I started thinking about how the sigil recurs in your work as a symbol repeatedly. And I was thinking about this idea of perhaps language as a form of radical sorcery. And we talked a little bit about it in Johannes's class. And I was wondering if you do think of it that way, as something that can actually materialize happening in the real world.
Well, you know, what the sigil does, it protects the purest energy. And then it sets up a blind where the energy can be protected. It's like Alan Watts once used an analogy about an old tree that nobody wanted to chop down. But because nobody wanted to chop it down, the energy was protected and hidden. And that's what happens to poets. You know, you set up all these blinds. You're a carpenter, you're this, you're that, you're this or that, but you're really a poet on the inside. And you're being protected by all these outer labels. And these outer labels enact themselves like sigils. It's kind of like a mystical terminology. But it's magical in that it protects one's energy to get to the greater good, if I can use that term, greater good. I hope that makes sense.
Okay. Joelle McSweeney wants you to talk about what kind of time scales and structures are implied by your cosmic vision.
I hate to give a general answer. By the way, I enjoyed your new book and her new book. And the fact is that this is something that we're dealing with an unlimited situation, not in a, it's uncanny because sometimes you think of a date, say, just to say, pick out a date, 1924. And, you know, in American consciousness, you may think of, say, a sport, you know, like 1924 was one of the last times I think this baseball team that's no longer in existence won a pennant. The Washington Senators. That's crazy. But what does that mean to what we're living in now? What we're getting into is human beings, as to what the oceans under the earth and things that are traveling out to the heavens. You know, it's no unknown birds that we're coming into contact with now. They have no recognition of that type of time. And that's the kind of time that I'm concerned for.
Austin, do you?
Yeah, so I'm recently a big fan. I've been reading through Kaleidoscopic Omniscience and also some of Vertical Rainbow Climber lately. I had two questions. I kind of wanted you to talk some more about some stuff you touched on kind of in your interludes between your poetry. One was maybe how as writers we can think of our relationship to the academy and sort of like also like work, because I know you've both taught and you've also worked jobs sort of outside of the academy, and sort of how you, I don't know, have find sort of those energies either troubled or like have found a way to like help them, whether it's through like academic structures or through like a day job, sort of like continue to, I don't know, like to keep moving, as you were saying. And then also I'd love to hear you talk more about poetry and jazz. I know you mentioned Cortázar, and I know like he was an amateur jazz player, and he and his translator thought of his relationship sort of like jazz. And yeah, just I'd love to hear more about that. Thanks.
Well, jazz has been central to my work because I was lucky to develop at a time where I was able to actually make these travels to see these, I call them not monuments, but these great oracles like Jackie McLean and Philly Joe Jones and Roy Haynes, Max Roach. I've been able to meet these people and hear them and talk to them and be in their presence. Elvin Jones, Archie Shepp. And it's been a real blessing, you know. Go on, I can mention so many names, but I don't want to give a laundry list. But one of the great experiences has been meeting these real practitioners. You know, these cats come from the streets. They're not coming from the academy. They're coming from, like Kenny Durham used to work at a factory. And not that I met Kenny Durham, but I know that experience of working day jobs and then going to play your horn at night. So that's exactly what I've been, you know, it's been my praxis over the time and space. One of my great experiences was actually meeting the parents of Eric Dolphy and sitting in the same chair that John Coltrane sat in while I was talking to his dad about John's experience playing Eric's bass clarinet. Things like that just empower me, you know, when I'm working a crazy job that I don't particularly care for. But I know that I can go back to the house and home and begin to sculpt the experience through language. And listening to great sounds, you know, just locking up in the house, just listening to music all day.
Mercy Hawkins says, I know you often accompany your written work with visual art also. Can you speak a little about how the visual components manifest? Do you think of them as a visual language? Are they closely related to the written work?
They are not directly, they're not simultaneous, but they're part of the same atmosphere that gives you another hand. You know, it's like some people are ambidextrous. They can throw a baseball with both hands. Well, that's allowed me to get a certain kind of an ambidextrous proclivity, and I can do several things at one time. It's allowed me to do many things at one time. Speeds up the quality of your living, your imagination.
Aristide Kirby asks, can Will talk more about how Buddhism has impacted his practice and his life?
Okay, Buddhism is very important because to empty the mind and to get it off of figments so that it has a kind of silence and a kind of concentration that you can focus at any time in your day or night to focus and cloud out the world, cloud out all the particulars, and so you can focus clearly on the project at hand, which has been I've been able to do that on a continuous basis. So it's kind of like writing is kind of for me like a meditation in that sense. There was a great Indian poet, Swami Ramalingan, who wrote his way out of the world, and that's part kind of like my praxis. Is writing is a way of, I wouldn't say salvation, but it is a way of entering into the greater cosmos.
That's beautifully put. We've held you here for a really long time. Can we I can just say thank you, Will, for all these readings and all these answers, and thanks for staying with us for such a long time. It's been great. Can we all give a virtual applause for Will?
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for showing up. And thanks so much for everything. And we hope to get in touch later on as things go, after the pandemic settles down. We don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully we'll be able to get off of, the machines and get into a room where we can actually see one another and talk. But thank you for appearing, and thank you for coming and participating.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me for this reading. Thank you personally.